very much, and thanks to all three speakers for being very much on time. We're having a slight logistic problem. I actually really love to have all three of you here, but that could only be in standing. So instead I will probably pass the microphone to you when questions are coming. And I see that Talia has a question.
Right. My question is for Professor Abrams, and this is very interesting because I'm interested in Masoretic, in the use of Masorah after the period of the let's say the stabilization of the biblical text, and why there is persistent copying of Masoretic annotations. To whom is this useful? And in the course of my inquiries, I came upon the information, the 73 or the 50 she'arim in the variant manuscripts of Sefer HaChochmah and David Siegel's article, and particularly in the David Siegel publication, which contains the application of some of the she'arim to the first verses of Genesis, I came to certain my own conclusions were, I'm not coming at it from authorship, I'm coming at it from something else. What I came to see was that there was a total, and I'll mention some of the names of the she'arim just to illustrate. So there's Sha'ar HaTagi, Sha'ar Karyan v'la Katvan, Katvan v'lo Karyan, Sha'ar HaTa'amim, Sha'ar Yater v'chaser, Yater, Sha'ar Otiyot Gdolot Uktanot, Sha'ar Zachan Ukeva, Sha'ar Hipuch, Sha'ar Tmura, Sha'ar Hamilui, Sha'ar Chelek Ba'emtza, and it goes on and on. And when you actually see in that edition that Siegel published, there's zero correlation between the title of the Sha'ar and the actual hermeneutical enterprise that's going on. My own reading of it, as somebody who's not schooled in this, is that really what you see in those illustrations is precisely the same krasim v'lulaot that is so characteristic of Rabbi Yehuda Hasid's writings and Elazar's writings, where you use any kind of hook to, whether it's gematria, notarikon, to see the interconnection of meanings. And what I actually, my own, I have some non-published thoughts about this, and I'd like to just read, if I may, it's a couple of sentences that's in a footnote to my own non-published work. If I'm correct in claiming that there is no discernible difference in technique between the work of associative bricolage, rubricated, right, linked with one rather than another label of the 50 or the 73 she'arim, the question remains as to why the author bothered to create such a list. Because the list is really not descriptive of what's going on, and why these names were assigned. These questions require further consideration, but for now I would suggest that in the environment of early 13th century Europe, when the systematization of learning aids was all the rage, a list of putative exegetical techniques was a mark of pedagogic sophistication. At a time when Christian Bible scholars were coming to favor study compositions that listed fourfold approach to exegesis and abandoning the more erudite compilations of patristic interpretations found in the Glossa Ordinaria and in the sentences of Peter Lombard, the pietists could boast of an infinitude of techniques, whether this was signaled in the number 50, corresponding to Chamishim Sha'arei Chochmah, or 73, corresponding to the Gematria of Chochmah. Whether the name techniques evoked Masorah, grammar, rabbinic hermeneutics, because Gzerah Shavah is one of these Sha'arim, alphanumeric manipulations, or in the case of Sefer HaChochmah, topics of ontological status, each connoted a pathway of authority. So I'm not entering into, first of all, I think that Saadia Gaon, and I'm riding the coattails of Rina Drori in saying this, but I think Saadia Gaon was the first Jew to write a book, an authored book, and he predates Elazar. Hebrew. Beseder, okay.
Jews writing Hebrew books.
Beseder, okay.
I have an obsession.
Okay, but I think the point here is, I think what's fascinating about these so-called she'arim is that these are just names. They do not differ very much. I mean, there's nothing about Sefer Hatagi in the one. In fact, only some of them in that David Siegel publication. There are just a very few of those that are actually used. And when you look at Sefer HaChochmah, very few of them are used, and there's total disconnect between the label and what's being done. So I think the question is I think your question is a very interesting one, and it's about Elazar and his willingness or his motivation for putting things in writing. But I think that we're asking the wrong questions about the Sha'arim. So that's
Okay. Thank you. It's a very rich engagement with the material. I don't disagree with anything. I think we're doing very different things and asking different questions. I don't think there's any necessary contradiction between what you said, except that your comments once again show that the She'arim are an exception to the vast corpus.
right.
And even though you don't want to engage authorship,
Well, I don't know enough to engage on.
well, I was just quoting you, but the question is, do we need consistency? Do we need to harmonize one text with another?
Okay.
If it's different, is it therefore not Elazar? Did he therefore receive it?
Okay.
Did he invent it? Does he have different voices? Or do we just read text?
Okay.
Okay, we have more questions. The first one I saw was Effie.
First of all, thank you very much for a very rich and engaging presentation. And I was wondering, trying to pull this back into Sefer Hasidim and the question of authorship. We know that during after the lifetime of Yehuda Hasid, there was a debate whether Sefer Hasidim was authored by him or by Elazar. And there are Ashkenazi sources from the 14th century, and I was discussing this with Moshe Jetchik yesterday. Ashkenazi sources from the 14th and 15th century attribute Sefer Hasidim more to Elazar than to Yehuda Hasid. So how does this critical engagement that you showed here with the Sharia Chokhmah kind of overshadow or kind of
First of all, it's endearing that our 14th century colleagues as academics and critical readers are more advanced maybe than we are today in considering various possibilities. I don't know, but it's not necessarily a book. As I tried to show in print, at least one place, the idea of copyright authorship, the ability, I've tried to take Paul Ricoeur's invitation to action as an invitation to rewriting. The text is an opportunity. The performance of the text is the ability of another person to reinvent it and shape it like Play-Doh in the hands of a child. And therefore, while we are running around saying, this person did this or that, everything folds back on earlier moments, later revisions, and I think we're asking the wrong questions. Or at least we're spending way too much time trying to answer particular questions and not seeing the material as it is.
Two comments really, one to Donnie and one to Sarah. I will also say to Talia, 3 comments. We'll have to get you together with my Dr. Antit Chayes in Königsberg, who's not going to exactly solve all of what you're asking, but who's going to try to argue that in fact there's a lot more correlation and aspects in Chayes. So don't listen, I'm just going to try to show that there's a lot more correlation and specificity within Elazar, that he's not sort of all over the road doing what someone describes as these boring kinds of things that don't go anywhere, but that's on the way. Let's get back to today. Donnie, since you're standing with yours first, your skepticism, your initial skepticism about Elazar having no students, and of course then you list off who they are in esoteric studies, I think is well based, because the fact is that Elazar really did not have barely a single student in his exoteric, in his Talmudic and Halachic realm. We were talking with Elizabeth about Aruga Kabosa, and even if he was a student, he doesn't produce the same kinds of halacha with Talmud that he does. And Isaac or Zeruah, who calls him a teacher, the vast majority of the 5 things that he cites are min haktav. So there, Elazar really, struck out. And I sometimes wondered if that's where he sort of got it from. There's a transposition here that, he's not doing too well in the Nigleh side, so he's now sort of transposing that to the Nistar side, but that makes your suspicion that you started with, I think, very much in place. So it's a comment which you can respond to, but...
I would say, and I don't mean this with much humor, I don't think Talmud studies were ever in danger of being compromised. I think only esotericism was under threat. So the question of to what degree he was successful or not successful, the question would be, was he trying?
Yeah, the stakes are certainly different. That's correct. That's correct. But again, exactly. The stakes are certainly different. But I think nonetheless, I would suggest that the comment to Sarah is, and this may be obvious, but the Sefer Higaleh, spelled as it was plene, with the Yud, yes, it's I think it may be a rabbinic etymology and lexicography here. Mechilta, Megilta, Hechalot, Higaleh. Now why isn't it Higalot? I think Higaleh works better for him for a number of reasons, but I think that's that. To me, it's obvious. I know people pointed it out, but I think that will probably do something there. And I'll just add that whatever you think you may have learned from us about London Miscellany, we've learned plenty from you, so please continue anyway.
You want to react to that?
Thank you.
Rana, you have a question?
Yeah, a question. To what Sarah showed us, the pictures, the four creatures, and you put also in your presentation this portal of Shalton. And I don't know if he did it on purpose or not. I mean, here is Christ also among the four creatures. And I was wondering, is this presentation of the 4 creatures, Christ of course among the 4 creatures, or the Lamb among the 4 creatures, I don't know, a motive which is, so to say, very much very much presented in the open world of the 13th century. I mean, the question is, in your Hebrew books, you have this. Is there a connection, or how do you see the connection?
In front of you sitting Adam Cohen, who knows much more about it. Yeah, well, my answer is yes, it's well presented throughout the urban space in medieval cities, and not only in manuscripts, but also on the covers of books, and in the illuminated manuscript, and on the portals. I brought the portal because it's in the center of town, and Jews, when they're walking not only in Shalton, everywhere, they can see the Christological message. It was meant not only for the Christians, but also for the Jews to see.
Okay, so can I push that since we're on the topic? So of course in the Christian iconography, each of the 4, as you know, each of the 4 represents one of the 4 evangelists. But you have 4 creatures and only one represents something. So how is that leap made in the text, and does it go anywhere beyond that?
That's interesting because only the human creature receives more attention in the texts throughout the centuries. It's something humans like humans in this creature. I don't know. It's like it's an obsessive thing with the human figure, unless we don't like.
I wanted to follow up on the same line
It's
of
a line
thinking.
of
And this is something that you just alluded to briefly, but the nut shape of the central, Christ panel in the Christian side. So I don't want to read too much into what you were saying. Were you trying to argue that that's where that's related to the Sodai goes, and that there's a causal relationship between how they're conceiving of the relationship to the goes and the Merkabah because of the way that it appears in the Christian?
Well, I think that they haven't represented it because of the Christological idea, and there's also an omission of it goes in the text. It's not apparent in the text. It's not. That's the only mystical thing that it's not there. That in the Kabbalah, and I think it was too obvious for the Jew to see the shape of the egos of the mandorla, and not to understand that it's related to Christian ideas. If you want to engage in polemics, then you you'll paint it, but here it's just, they don't touch it upon it. But there are many polemic stuff in this map.
I can see.
I don't want us to leave here thinking that this Hasidic Ashkenaz corpus is a miasma that cannot be sorted out with questions that are relevant to our own lives, and that we're all asking the wrong questions all the time. It's true that we're anachronistically inclined because we are impressed with certain ideas like the one authored book and so on, which I'm trying to destabilize. And we're all trying to get at the sources and figure out the mindset of these people who lived hundreds of years ago. I think one of the ways of getting at Danny's astute observations about the overlap and fluidity and the problem of asking the wrong questions is perhaps to try to get into their heads. And in other words, we see what they say about what they're writing. Elazar has this habit, as in the beginning of his drasha, the Pesach, in his commentary on Sefer Yetzirah, to thank his father and Yehuda Hasid for everything he's about to write. So he's claiming non-originality, even when he puts his name all over his books. So that means something in his head means that it's not originating with him, but he is putting it into a form which somehow he wants to announce for whatever reasons. Is he debating with his anonymous teacher? Is he having a problem with some contemporaries who are claiming? We don't know, but that's not inconsistent, that's just the data. He's claiming that it's from someone else, but he's putting his name on it. Now there may be a way of looking at the self-image of the writer by asking about prophecy or non-prophecy. We know Shmuel had this epithet Hanavi. Yehuda didn't, but he does talk about revelation to himself. The passage that that Maoz quotes at the beginning of his discussion of the Tzava'ah, I think it's Parma 1950, where he talks about the irresponsibility of the person to whom is revealed something for not writing it down. And he did it anonymously, maybe feeling that what he was transmitting came from on high. Elazar apparently didn't think of himself as a Navi. His writing formats seemed to be, to him, derived from his teacher and father, and yet he was putting down his name on everything. So the self-image of receiving prophetic information and putting it in writing versus receiving it from other humans and putting it in writing may be a better way of trying to sort this out without getting bogged down in too many anachronisms. Because as Susan showed earlier, there are differences, and I tried to do this in Piety and Society. We tried not to just mush it all together into a miasma. So without getting irrelevant and anachronistic, but paying attention to the data, maybe some of these other pursuits of how do they think of themselves and how do they express it, put those two together and see if we can come up with something to explain the overlap, which is abundant. They overlapped in their own compositions, they overlap between their compositions. It's very confusing, and yet we can try to find some distinctions and some theories to explain the data. I think I applaud your effort to try to destabilize the old questions and to ask new ones.
Thank you. I think that was a very clear statement of where you and I differ. I don't think we should subsume the method, the chaos I am seeking to embrace in order to reconstruct the figures and authors. I am trying to discard that, and almost permanently. I do not think prophecy and revelation is so central to German pietism and would be relatively less helpful for the very same questions that we are discussing. I do think that Ingval's work is an execution of how this method is practical and relevant in editorial practice, and just to quote my own student, there is no anchor, there is no clear work that is written, authored, identified with Yehuda Hasid to which to compare anything else. The most accurate and scholarly responsible engagement is to realize that we have a decentered universe of text across the various figures and generations with rewriting, and there is no clear example of authorship and work. What I have tried to do is not to see texts as instrumental devices to get to the thought of the person and the subject which was constructed around the 18th century. As cultural Jewish figures or representatives, we want, as if, to animate these figures and meet with them as if we can be interviewing them and they're sitting alive in the room with us today. So I would like to say rather strongly, we do not read Elazar or Judah. We read texts that are attributed to them, may have originated from them or not. The object of study are the texts and the manuscripts. The texts are not instruments towards reaching people and speaking with us.
What about readership? What about society and readership? Anchored by a manuscript.
You apparently belong to the Shazar Center of Social History. I'm in the Department of Makshev Israel. I'm a textual scholar, and I sell my wares, and I respect other wares, but we have different methods and emphases, and they can live side by side in harmony. But one should not trample over the other.
This looks like the perfect ending for us. For each other is what makes this conference such a pleasure. And I think we should continue this discussion in the next break.
שניתן לראות בהם את סימני החיים והלכי המחשבה של הדורות